My name is Nevaeh Moore. I'm 33 years old, the second daughter in the Moore family, a family where love was measured in company shares, attention was handed out by rank, and silence was the price you paid if you weren't the rightful heir. That Thanksgiving night, my father, Richard Moore, stood before over 100 relatives and business partners, raised his glass, and boldly declared, "Our family has sold all of Moore Tech Solutions, and I've decided my children will get nothing." The clinking of silverware stopped. The entire table froze. My older brother, Ethan, seethed with anger. My younger sister, Madison, burst into tears. And me? I quietly sipped my wine. Because I knew that in less than 2 hours, he would discover that the person he was selling the company to was me. Have you ever been dismissed, pushed out of your own life? Have you ever worked for years, only to return one day not to beg but to claim the place that was always yours? Leave a comment if you've ever felt forgotten in your own family or left out of life-changing decisions simply because you weren't the chosen one. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear the full story of how I once denied and erased, silently rebuilt everything, and became my own father's greatest nightmare. Because right now, I'll tell you how it all began. I was born into a family where power seeped into every marble tile in the foyer, every Persian rug stretching from the hallway to the study. Our name Moore was tied to Moore Tech Solutions, a tech conglomerate headquartered in the center of Boston, a place many called the heart of innovation and prestige. On the surface, we were the image of the American dream. 3 generations tied to one enterprise, holding tens of millions of dollars from enterprise software, invited to speak at Harvard, funding scholarships, and appearing on the cover of Forbes. But behind those towering mahogany doors, no one truly saw each other as family. There were only roles, expectations, and pride twisted by the belief that only one child is chosen to inherit. My father, Richard Moore, admired by all on the outside. He was colder at home than the winter wind blowing off the Charles River. He had built Moore Tech from a rented office in an industrial park into a software empire. He never tolerated weakness or difference. He placed all his trust in Ethan, my older brother, as if Ethan were his perfect reflection. Tall, with a deep voice and a firm handshake, qualities my father valued far more than real knowledge. Ethan was named Chief Strategy Officer at 25, simply because he was the obvious heir. He had no degree in tech, had never written a line of code or grasped how a system worked. But he knew how to raise a glass at the right time, how to coax investors over dinners with bankers, and how to pretend to listen. During those years, I was the one drafting proposals for innovation, the one suggesting customer data automation, and the one my father never even looked at. Graduated from MIT, impressive. But do you understand what real clients want? Don't bring vague theories into actual business, he once told me when I laid the first draft of a cloud system design on his desk. And my mother, Caroline, always played the role of elegance, but chose silence whenever conflict rose. Coming from an old wealthy family in Beacon Hill, she had learned that a good woman never argued, never raised her voice, and always poured the wine at just the right time to keep the peace. Each time I challenged my father, she would place her hand gently over mine and shake her head, whispering, "Nevaeh, you're only making this harder." I would sit in family meetings, watching Ethan boast about new product strategies I knew I had written, seeing my mother smile sweetly as if he were truly a genius, then watching my father pat his shoulder with a pride he never once spared for me. I learned silence not because I lacked words, but because in that house my voice was never defined as authority. I learned to withdraw not out of weakness, but to observe, to note every crack in their web of power. Madison, my younger sister, belonged to another world entirely. She lived through her phone lens, building a brand with photos from the Hamptons, Aspen ski resorts, and beauty award shows. She started every story with "my followers think" and ended with a string of endless hashtags. She didn't care about software, data security, or the code that could change whole systems. Yet my father still called her an essential part of the Moore brand. And me? I was labeled stubborn, unteachable, too ambitious for a woman. I once believed that if I worked harder, my father would see me, but the truth was he never wanted to. When I realized that, I left not with a broken heart, but with a plan. A plan no one could predict, a plan that needed no spotlight, no permission, and no more surname to be acknowledged. For 10 years, they believed I was wandering with small projects in California. And for 10 years, day by day, week by week, I quietly built my own empire on the very foundations they overlooked, on the ideas they had scorned. The night before Thanksgiving, I sat in a hotel room on the 34th floor, looking out at Boston's city lights reflecting against the glass. A message from my assistant confirmed. The acquisition of Moore Tech would be announced after tomorrow's dinner, once Richard Moore signed the contract already approved by his CFO. I wasn't returning for recognition. I came back to end the cycle of favoritism. And I wanted to see my father's face when he discovered the person he was handing his company to was the daughter he had spent more than a decade erasing from every boardroom. I can still recall that spring meeting, the year I was about to graduate MIT. I had spent 6 months perfecting a cloud-based data integration platform, a solution I believed could modernize Moore Tech's outdated systems, helping hundreds of enterprise clients optimize operations without costly overhauls. I drafted a full business plan complete with risk analysis, 3-year revenue projections, and a live demo. I walked into the walnut-paneled conference room on the 4th floor, the largest in the building where my father had signed countless million-dollar deals. The senior executives, all longtime friends and partners of my father, some who had once held me as a toddler, smiled politely, but their eyes were colder than I expected. "You have 15 minutes, my father said, eyes never leaving his phone. I plugged in my laptop, began to speak. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I went deeper into the analysis. I was just explaining the link between legacy ERP systems and modern cloud services when he raised his hand. "That's enough." He cut me off mid-sentence. I froze. "Sounds nice," he smirked. "Very creative, but naive." The room went heavy. "Our clients don't want risk," he continued. "They want stability. Not experiments from someone fresh out of school. I'm not suggesting a full system overhaul, I only Nevea." He cut me off again. "You're my daughter. I know you love technology, but this is real business. What you learn in classrooms doesn't apply here the way you think." I looked at him, wanting to believe he was protecting me from failure. But when he turned to the board and said, half mocking, "She's just in that dreamy phase," I understood. It wasn't about inexperience. It was about me not being the heir he wanted. I quietly packed up my materials, sat through the rest of the meeting as Ethan strolled in, shirt wrinkled, joking. Did anyone order lunch yet? They didn't need to fire me. They only needed to make me feel like I didn't belong. That night, I went back to my small Beacon Hill apartment, packed what I could carry, and booked a one-way ticket to San Francisco. I had no detailed plan. Just one thing I carried: the software design I'd spent all winter building, and a simmering belief that if no one would give me a chance, I would create it myself. San Francisco greeted me with chilly nights and a lonely silence. I rented a rundown studio in the Mission District where the smell of tacos mixed with mildew and car horns every evening. On my first day at a small startup, I had to borrow my roommate's laptop because mine had died on the flight. I worked 80-hour weeks, from writing every line of code to fixing customer bugs to answering tech support calls. I learned to speak with investors without revealing that I was a young woman with no family backing. I signed emails with the neutral name M. Stone. No one asked, no one guessed. I ate instant noodles so often I knew every cheap brand at the corner store. But every night, under the dim light of a desk lamp, I kept building the idea my father had cut short. I named my company Horizon Dynamics, a name without more, without legacy. Just quiet determination and a clear strategy to build a platform bridging the past and future of enterprise data. 3 years later, I stood in my own office, a loft in Soma with 10 employees, 4 steady clients, and my first round of investment from a Seattle fund. Still me, but no longer Richard Moore's daughter. I was a CEO, the mind behind a solution bigger companies were calling the generational handover system. And through all the calls, contracts, and conference talks, I never once mentioned Boston. I thought I had buried that conference room memory, but then an email from a major client caught my eye. They had been a longtime partner of More Tech. Now they wanted to switch to Horizon Dynamics because Moore's system is outdated, no longer keeping pace with growth. I froze at the screen. 10 years. And now, the very technology I once proposed was the thing pushing more tech to the edge. I pulled out my old MIT plan, now a full commercial product used by over 300 companies. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just sat there, hollow inside. I had gone so far that I almost forgot why I began, and then I decided to return, not for revenge, but to put everything back where it always should have been. I chose the name Elena Stone not because it was special, but because it carried nothing from my past. Elena was the name of a classmate who once helped me through long late-night coding sessions at MIT, and Stone was the image I kept reminding myself of. Silent, solid, and not easily swayed by emotion. When I officially registered Horizon Dynamics, I used Elena on every legal document, every bank account, even hired someone to sign the first trial contracts under that name. Everything was arranged carefully so no one could trace it back to Boston. I didn't want the Moore surname to be the reason doors opened. If my product wasn't strong enough to stand on its own, then I didn't deserve the chance at all. Horizon began as 3 people working out of a converted warehouse in the Mission District. I used what I had saved after 2 years freelancing to rent that space, no air conditioning, rusted windows, and my first desk was an old wooden table bought at a flea market. But every night, after everyone left, I stayed. Writing code, testing, recording every line of customer feedback, then teaching myself how to make it better. We started with the smallest contracts, a warehouse tracking system for a sneaker startup in Oakland, a data dashboard for a delivery company in San Jose. There were months I couldn't pay rent on time, weeks when I lived on a box of instant noodles from the discount store and cheap instant coffee. But clients returned. They referred their friends. Then a medical equipment manufacturer in Los Angeles came to me, asking to integrate Horizon software into their entire production workflow. I worked nearly without sleep for 6 months to deliver. When they signed, the first payment was enough to clear my debts, buy new servers, and hire the very first full-time technicians. I still remember the day the first official employee signed his contract. He was from Texas, fresh out of college, sharp but humble. During the interview, he asked me, "Miss Elena, why doesn't your company have any media coverage? I couldn't even find you on LinkedIn." I laughed and answered simply, "Because I believe good technology speaks louder than the founder." That was how I ran the company for the first 4 years. No fanfare, no mass fundraising, no conference appearances. I spent most of my time in the office, working directly with clients, fixing bugs, listening to every piece of feedback, no matter how small. Slowly, Horizon became the go-to choice for companies struggling with outdated systems and desperate to move on to something new. One of the biggest turning points came with a contract from an international shipping conglomerate in Chicago. Their data system was fragmented across 6 countries, impossible to sync. In 6 months, we built a real-time data integration model, and performance rose 42% in the very first quarter. The name Horizon Dynamics began appearing in internal tech conferences. Small news outlets wrote about our breakthrough solutions, but I still avoided every interview request. Elena Stone remained a mystery. Investors only knew her through perfectly detailed, on-time financial reports. I kept everything anonymous. Even the company's social media accounts were handled by another department. I only appeared in internal meetings, always making the final call but never taking the spotlight. Only one person knew the truth. Celia, my first roommate, now Horizon's COO. She had seen me stay awake 3 nights straight to fix a single interface bug. And she was the only one who ever asked me the question that left me speechless for a long time. Nevaeh, when will you finally live as yourself? I couldn't answer. Because deep down, I carried one fear: if they ever discovered I was Richard Moore's daughter, they'd think my success was just inherited privilege. They'd think Horizon was nothing more than an extension of a legacy. I couldn't endure that again. When Horizon reached a valuation of $300 million after a strategic partnership with a European telecom giant, I walked out of the conference room and stood silently by the glass on the 26th floor, staring at the San Francisco lights flowing like a river of fire. I had made it here, on my own. No one paved the road, no one opened the doors. Every step I took was pressed into cold cement, not velvet carpets embossed with a family crest. And then, in a quarterly strategy meeting, when the analysis team presented a potential acquisition target, a struggling company in Boston, I saw the name More Tech Solutions. The report didn't mention me, just numbers, charts, forecasts of shrinking market share, broken cash flow, outdated security systems, and skyrocketing employee turnover. But I wasn't looking at numbers. I was looking at the past I had left behind, and I understood the path I had walked for so many years was leading me back to where it began. I sat at my desk, hand on the mouse, but not moving. The line More Tech Solutions, acquisition likelihood high, blinked across the spreadsheet. The numbers didn't lie. My father's company was decaying from within. Client losses rising steadily over 3 quarters. Operating costs not reduced in time. More Tech shares quietly sold off by long-term partners as strategic transfers. All of it being quietly collected by Horizon Dynamics, piece by piece, orchestrated by our investment strategy team. There was only one piece left. Richard Moore was still the majority shareholder and CEO. If I wanted the full acquisition, he would have to sign the final agreement. And I wanted his signature in the one moment he'd least expect it. I called a closed meeting with Celia and the head of financial strategy. On the table was the official acquisition proposal under the name Oriole Ventures, an investment fund Horizon owned a majority stake in but had never revealed publicly. I want this deal closed in 2 weeks, I said firmly, eyes fixed on the contract. Celia looked at me for a long moment. Nevaeh, she said softly, are you sure you want to go to Boston yourself? We could handle everything remotely. I need to be there, I replied. Not to sign, but to watch him when he realizes he just sold everything to the daughter he once denied. The room fell into silence. The finance team didn't ask further. They understood this was more than a transaction. Throughout the preparation, I checked every clause carefully. The agreement was structured so the company would retain the More Tech name, but become a subsidiary under Horizon. The executive board would be restructured. The founding shareholder, my father, would be offered an honorary but powerless title, Chairman Emeritus. Legally, everything was airtight. No one could sue. No one could undo it. I instructed the communications team to hold all press releases until after Thanksgiving. I wanted the facade to stay intact until the moment I walked into the house I had left more than a decade ago. My flight to Boston was booked under an alias. I rented a car from Logan Airport, no driver, no company logos. I didn't want anyone to know I had arrived. I drove through streets lined with red leaves. Late November in Boston always carried a deceptive calm, as if time had stopped. But I wasn't the timid student crossing Harvard Yard anymore. I returned as someone who had seen the world, coming back only to settle the unfinished fragments of memory. I stopped on Beacon Hill, where my family's old house stood among pines and white-trimmed windows. The roof still held the same Christmas wreath as every holiday season. It looked unchanged. But I knew inside, Moore Tech was crumbling, and Richard Moore no longer sat steady on the throne he had always meant to pass to his eldest son. I didn't knock. I just stood at the gate for a while, then turned away. That night, back at the hotel, I opened my laptop to review the contract one final time. An email from legal confirmed Oriole Ventures had completed the buyout of the three largest strategic partners' shares. Two critical clients, a pharmaceutical distributor and an electronics manufacturer, had signed contracts migrating services to Horizon's platform. Moore Tech had no way back. I leaned into my chair, hand over my forehead. My father's image filled my mind. Him standing at the dinner table, glass of red wine raised, his commanding voice echoing in the dark wood dining room lined with family portraits. Tomorrow, he would do it again, as he had every year, stand at Thanksgiving dinner, declaring decisions as if he were a king reading a decree. Only this time he had no idea the greatest decision of his life had already been arranged by the daughter he once ignored. And she would be there, sitting at that table, with a glass of wine in hand, but no longer silent. I texted Celia, "I'll be at the house tomorrow night. Make sure no one contacts Moore Tech until after the dinner." Her reply appeared almost instantly. "Are you certain? After tomorrow, nothing will ever be the same." I typed back one line. "That's exactly why I have to be there." I stood, walked to the wardrobe. Every item I chose had meaning. A gray Armani suit, an ivory silk high-neck blouse, classic Italian heels from Florence. Nothing too showy, but every detail carried weight. I didn't need to flaunt. I only needed them to feel the difference. Inside my suitcase was one thing I had prepared separately. A card embossed with Horizon Dynamics logo, bearing the simple line, "Elena Stone, CEO." I would place it on the table at the exact moment needed. Not before, not after. I rolled the suitcase near the door, checked the time, then sat back down. Outside the window, Boston sank into night. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving. And I would walk into that old house as someone entirely new. I arrived nearly 20 minutes early. The driver stopped at the iron gates of the old house. Everything was as I remembered from over 10 years ago. The red brick facade, faintly whitewashed by winter mist, the two great oaks shedding leaves across the stone path, and a row of glass lanterns hanging low from the porch roof down to the steps. I stepped out of the car, inhaled deeply in the late November chill. The heavy wooden door swung open before I could even press the bell. It was my mother. "Nevaeh." She hesitated, her smile strained, but not entirely insincere. "You're home." I tilted my head in greeting, gently hugging her. The familiar perfume mixed with the strong scent of wine on her breath. "Not surprising. Everyone's in the living room," she said, avoiding my eyes as she shut the door. "Did you have a smooth trip?" "Smooth enough. Colder than San Francisco, but not unbearable." I walked down the long hallway, past the family photos still hanging there. Me with my hair tied back, standing between Ethan and Madison in a high school portrait, my father at the Massachusetts Business Council recognition ceremony, our family on a vacation in Martha's Vineyard. The year I had a fever and spent the whole trip in the hotel room, but was still dragged out for a photo to complete the frame. The living room opened with warm golden lights, but the atmosphere was entirely different. My mother poured wine for my father. He sat in his familiar leather chair by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch, eyes fixed on his phone. Madison angled her phone, adjusting for the best shot, a small ring light perched on the armrest. Ethan, dressed in a dark suit, was going on and on about the yacht he had just purchased in Florida. It even has a glass deck to watch the ocean at night. And the private cabins? Each one has separate climate control. The VIP clients I entertained yesterday were speechless. Wow, Madison exclaimed dramatically, her eyes never leaving her screen. That's going to be perfect for my stories. My father glanced up briefly when he noticed me, gave a quick nod, then looked back down. You're here. I smiled, not stepping into the center of the room, but quietly moving toward the corner by the window, where no one Saturday, a low cushioned chair beside the bookshelf. No one pointed it out to me, yet somehow I knew that seat was mine. Nevaeh, you came just in time, Madison chirped, turning her phone toward me, her voice high-pitched. The whole family together, everyone. This is my sister, the one you always ask about, but I've never tagged because she's so private. I sat down, looked straight into the lens, and offered a faint smile. Hello, Madison's followers. Are you here just to relax, or is there something special? She tilted her head. We're planning to live stream until dessert. I came for dinner. My answer was short, my voice light. Ethan stood, walked over, and placed a hand on my shoulder. Hey, philosopher. I heard you're doing something in tech? You're still working from home, right? I glanced at his hand, then lifted my eyes to his. Not from home anymore. I have my own office now. Oh, impressive. He grinned, stepping back. Congrats. What's your company called again? It's not more tech. So maybe that's why you haven't heard of it. I could feel my mother's gaze behind her glass of wine. Something in her eyes was unclear, a mix of pride and fear. Everyone, let's head to the dining room, my mother interrupted, trying to keep her voice steady. Dinner is ready. The dining room looked just as I remembered. The long oak table, 2 rows of moss-green upholstered chairs, the blue and white Wedgwood china, reserved for special occasions, and the 2 silver candlesticks in the center, tall and cold like dividing lines. My seat was placed at the far end, opposite my mother. My father sat at the head of the table, Ethan to his left, Madison to his right. Between me and them stretched a long silence. Each person had a full glass of wine. I didn't drink right away. I looked at the dishes, perfectly arranged: chestnut stuffed turkey, cranberry sauce, buttery mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and cornbread. My mother always kept the dinner traditional, even though the family never truly sat together throughout the year. Madison lifted her phone, snapping pictures from every angle. This story will definitely trend. The Moore family dinner, once a year. And Nevaeh showed up. Who would have guessed she'd come? I stayed quiet. My father still didn't look up. He kept scrolling, occasionally leaning toward Ethan to whisper. Each time, Ethan nodded, swirling his glass. Richard, my mother began. I think the kids should. Hold on, Caroline. He cut her off, eyes locked on his screen. I'm about to announce something important. The table fell silent. Ethan set his glass down. Madison lowered her phone. My mother glanced at me, as if warning me of what was to come. My father stood, lifting his glass. Family, friends, and all who are here tonight. He began with the same deep, confident tone he used in countless dinners past. I have an announcement that will change the future of Moore Tech, and the future of us all. He lowered his glass slowly, as if savoring the moment of holding everyone's attention a few 2 seconds longer. His eyes swept across the table, then fixed on Ethan and Madison, his expression tightening, lips pressed as though restraining something heavy. After 35 years of running more tech, his voice echoed in the hushed room, I've made a decision that wasn't easy. I sat still at the far end, hand resting lightly on my water glass, eyes steady on his face. Nothing about his theatrics surprised me. His way of framing every move as history, I'd seen it too many times. More tech, he continued, is the child I raised with sweat and labor. From a rented office on Harrison Street to the headquarters in Boston's financial district, from 3 people to over 200 across 3 states. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed, eyes glowing with certainty that the next words would name him as successor. I once hoped, my father paused, that one of my children would carry it forward. But reality, he placed both hands on the table, leaning slightly forward. The reality is my children have their own paths, choices that do not align with the mission more tech requires in this era of transition. Ethan tilted his head. What do you mean? I've sold the company, my father said bluntly. The deal closes tomorrow morning. Oriole Ventures will take full ownership. For a few seconds, no one moved, only the soft crackle of candle flames. Then Ethan shot to his feet, his chair scraping harshly against the table leg. You're joking, right? He snapped. You sold the company without telling us? This didn't need discussion, my father replied, calmly pouring another sip of scotch. I'm the majority shareholder, and the founder. And what about my future? Ethan's voice cracked with anger. 12 years of work, and you're throwing it away? 12 years in an office, my father corrected. But more tech has been falling behind. I've kept it longer than I should have. Madison lowered her phone, her face pale. Wait, are you saying the more tech brand will disappear? Unclear whether they'll rename it or keep it, he answered, as if discussing a change in coffee suppliers. You can't do that, Madison stammered. Every one of my social accounts is tied to the company name. I have nearly 800,000 followers. They see me as the heir. Tell them the truth, he said coolly. That we chose to do the right thing. Ethan pressed his hands on the table, voice sharp. How much did you get? 52 million, he replied without flinching. My mother Caroline set her glass down, lips trembling. Richard, what are we going to do with that money? He glanced at her briefly, then turned to the table. We'll use it to establish the Moore Foundation, focused on tech education and digital transformation in public schools. The rest will fund retirement. And us? Madison cried. Nothing? No trust fund, no shared shares? Nothing at all? No, he answered firmly. I've thought it through. Your careers aren't tied to this company, and I won't feed that illusion anymore. Ethan slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. You've destroyed everything, making decisions on your own, then declaring it like it's some gift. It's not a gift, I said quietly. My voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to turn every head. It's just the logical end to a string of bad choices. Ethan stared at me, stunned. What do you mean? I set down my glass, rose, and walked slowly toward my father. He remained seated, his eyes beginning to flicker. I have just one question, Father, I said, resting my hand lightly on the table. Did you ever read the contract from Oriole Ventures carefully? His brows furrowed. I had my advisors review it. Every clause was legally sound. I nodded slightly, then reached into my bag and pulled out a small case. Opening it, I laid a metal business card before him. He looked down at the embossed logo, Horizon Dynamics, then at the line beneath, Elena Stone, CEO. No, impossible, he muttered. I'm the one who submitted the acquisition offer, I said. I stand behind Oriole Ventures. And before you react further, you should know I currently control 68% of the core supply chain your company depends on. No one spoke. Madison suddenly collapsed back into her chair, whispering, "You're Elena Stone, the CEO of Horizon?" I nodded, eyes locked on my father. He was trembling, his hand on the table clenched tighter and tighter. "And I didn't do this for revenge," I continued evenly. "I did it because Mortec deserves a real chance, not a family pretending to understand technology while ignoring outdated systems for years." Ethan stood frozen. My mother raised her hand to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. "It can't be you," my father gasped. "I walked away 10 years ago because you told me I was just a dreamer," I said, my gaze steady. "And now, the company you just sold, you handed it to the daughter you never thought would succeed." Madison scrambled for her phone, whispering, "Everyone, tonight's story is unbelievable. My sister just revealed, Madison, turn it off." I cut in. She blinked, then lowered her hand. My father no longer looked at anyone, his head bowed, shoulders stiff as stone. The room seemed to stop breathing. The scent of cold turkey drifted into the heavy air. And at that long dining table, I, the child erased from every family plan, was, for the first time, the only one in complete control. Ethan lunged forward, snatching the business card from my father's hand, reading it aloud as though it were some cruel joke I'd crafted to torment them. "Elena Stone, Horizon Dynamics?" His voice was hoarse. "No, you can't be. The one behind that company. No way." I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled a folder from my leather bag, placing it gently on the table. The silver-gray cover bore the Horizon Dynamics emblem in the corner. When I opened it, every eye locked on the crisp pages, stamped with seals from all three parties: Horizon, Oriole Ventures, and Mortec. "This is a copy of the merger agreement," I said, flipping through. "Page 7 carries your lawyer's signature, and the legal certification confirming the company now belongs entirely to Horizon." My father didn't move. His hands gripped the chair, knuckles white. Ethan couldn't contain his fury. He slammed the table again, silverware clattering. "Why would you do this? Lurking, setting traps for your own family?" "No one set a trap," I replied calmly. "Mortec has been in crisis for 3 years. Fake financial reports couldn't hide the truth. I simply offered a solution at the right time, a solution you never fully read when you first received it." "What?" my father croaked, lifting his head, his voice dry. "The first contract Horizon sent, under the name Phoenix Proposal, it was rejected in less than 48 hours. I looked him straight in the eye. You didn't even read the section about keeping the brand name. You just saw the company name and dismissed it. You came back just to humiliate Dad in front of the whole family?" Ethan's voice ground out, each word like stone. "All these years he raised us, and now you show up to steal the company." "Steal?" I let out a soft laugh. "Ethan, if you hadn't burned through the internal budget on $3,000 dinners at hotels, if you hadn't created 5 ghost expense accounts in the management system, maybe Mortec would still have some strength left." He shot to his feet. "That's a lie." I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled another folder from my case, thicker, wrapped in silver security. "Paper. I don't speak without proof. This is a copy of the internal audit reports from the past 6 months, combined with data extracted from the management server you yourself logged into, from the office IP address." Madison's mouth fell open, but before she could say anything, my mother spoke soft but clear. "Richard, is that true?" My father didn't respond. His eyes closed. His whole face seemed to withdraw, stiffening like a stone statue weathered by time. I turned toward my mother. She still held her wine glass, but her hand trembled. "I didn't mean to turn everything upside down, but if this family wants to live in truth, then someone has to start." Madison sniffed, eyes still glued to her phone, though the live stream was gone. So, what do you want? To control the whole family? Make us kneel down and thank you because you're the wealthy CEO? I shook my head. I don't want anyone kneeling. I want more tech to exist in a way worthy of the legacy our grandfather left behind. And I want those who've been invisible like I once was to have a voice. You're talented, Madison pressed, her voice rising. But this family isn't some battlefield for you to return and prove you've won. I laid my hand on the table, meeting her eyes. And who turned it into a battlefield? Who posted every photo, every party with more text name plastered like it was your personal fashion backdrop? Who sold client contract data to a cosmetics brand in exchange for a few thousand followers? She froze. I exhaled, then turned back to my father. I don't need your acceptance. I just need you to see. I built a business with my own hands, without a single dollar from this house. And you, by selling the company without bothering to understand, placed everything in mine. He stared at me for a long time. Those eyes, the ones I once believed could tell me if he was proud or disappointed with a single look, were now silent, hollow. At last, he spoke, his voice barely more than breath. You planned all of this from the start? Not a plan, I answered. Just the reflex of someone left behind too long. Ethan turned away, storming out as though staying another second might make him do something he couldn't control. Madison collapsed into her chair, biting her lip, eyes glistening but holding back tears. She had learned how to keep up appearances even while breaking. My mother sat frozen, hand on her glass, her gaze on me heavy with words unspoken. And my father, he said nothing more. Only his eyes, no longer denying, remained of the man who once commanded an empire. But now he sat there, watching his daughter, the one he refused to give a chance, quietly take everything. No shouting, no coup, only contracts, legality, strategy, and truth. A truth no one in that room could deny. Ethan stopped in the doorway, his shoulders twitching not from emotion, but from the terror of exposure gnawing down to his bones. I pulled a third file from my bag, set it on the table, and opened it to the first page. A bank account statement under the name White Reef Consulting, registered in the Cayman Islands. Legal representative, Ethan Moore. This shell company was created by Ethan 3 years ago. I began, my voice steady in the airless room. Internal transfers from Moretech labeled as consulting fees have totaled nearly $600,000 as of last month. Ethan lunged, hissing through his teeth. You were spying on me? No. You left the trail in every transaction. Each transfer carried the same digital signature tied to your personal account. I flipped the pages, showing screenshots of bank transactions, all verified by 3 independent auditors. The air thickened. No one moved. Only my mother's breathing grew heavier, as if she were suffocating under the weight of the numbers. I looked directly at Ethan. And here proof you spent. Most of that money on online sports betting platforms banned in the US. I slid a tablet across the table. On the screen were deposits, each with screenshots of wagers placed. Horizon's attorneys have already cross-checked with federal authorities. If necessary, they can press criminal charges. Ethan said nothing. Sweat glistened at his temples. He collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hand as though shielding himself from the burning stares around him. I turned to Madison. She was pale, clutching her phone. I placed a white envelope on the table, inside a copy of her contract with a luxury French perfume brand. 2 months ago, Madison sent an internal Moretech data package, including product launch schedules, Q4 marketing strategies, and a list of potential partners to this brand, in exchange for 3 sponsored photo and video campaigns on social media, plus a vacation in Nice. Madison started, her voice catching. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I played a recording of her call with the brand's representative, her voice clear. I grabbed the data from the internal system. No one knows I screenshotted it when Dad forgot to log out. Her face drained of color. You tracked me? No. You sent the files through your personal email, on the company network. This is a serious breach of trade secrecy. I paused. I didn't make it public because I still wanted to preserve some dignity for this family. Madison's silence broke only with tears sliding down her cheeks, no matter how hard she pressed her lips. I turned to my mother. Caroline wore the look of someone trapped in a family play she no longer controlled. She raised her glass, then set it down untouched. Finally, she faced me, her voice lower. For years, I've followed you through the articles. I knew you were achieving something extraordinary. I looked at her. No blame, no expectation. I knew, but I stayed silent. She continued, her hands trembling. That day, after the board meeting, I wanted to speak up. But your father, he was too unyielding. And I was afraid this family would shatter if I didn't stand with him. I met her eyes. You chose silence. And you let me leave this house like a child erased. Tears pooled at her eyes. I'm sorry, Nevaeh. I was wrong. I should have defended you. I should have told your father you deserved respect, that you deserved to be heard. I didn't answer right away. Inside me, something tightened and released at once. Not forgiveness, but at least acknowledgement. My father still sat in silence, turning to the window where streetlights reflected across the table. His look held no arrogance, no denial, only layered quiet. I rose, my gaze sweeping over the three who remained. No one spoke. No glasses clinked. No one dared ask what I would do next. No one dared imagine negotiation, because what they once hid, mocked, and dismissed now lay in the open. No escape, no roles to play. And I held the pen to write the next chapter of the family that once cast me aside like a blot of ink in the moor line. The next morning, I entered the study, the air damp in a mansion that once symbolized power but now smelled of age and stillness. The room hadn't changed in all these years: dusty shelves, the old leather chair facing the window, the oil painting of a lone ship at sea hanging in its eternal place. My father stood at the mahogany desk, his hand resting on it, his shoulders bent, as though his body had surrendered to an undeniable truth. Sit, he said without looking up. I walked forward, pulled out the chair, and sat across from him. Morning light streamed through the window, casting long shadows on his face, the face of a man once untouchable, now carrying a fatigue he tried to hide. You did very well, he said, his voice low and dry. I never imagined Elena Stone was you. I stayed silent, not because I lacked words, but because I wanted him to feel the weight of his own. He turned, his eyes bloodshot but dry. I once thought you'd leave this industry forever. I believed Ethan would inherit. I built more tech not to see it fall into the hands of the daughter I once called a dreamer. I leaned back in the chair, my hand resting lightly on the armrest. Maybe you were right, I answered calmly. I used to dream. But they weren't fantasies. They were clear goals, with direction and vision. The very thing more tech has lost for a long time. My father frowned but didn't interrupt. He turned back to the desk, pulled open a drawer, and took out a brown envelope, placing it in front of me. Starting next week, I'll step down from my role. The stakeholders have signed their agreement. You'll have the company. What do you plan to do next? I looked at him. That question wasn't meant to find an answer. It was an acknowledgement, a forced way of asking because he no longer had the power to command. I'll keep the name More Tech, I said slowly. Not for the family's reputation, but for the people still working there, the ones who believe the name can stand for innovation, not just legacy. He nodded, very slowly. His hands tightened, the knuckles prominent on his aging skin. And what about me? He asked, almost in a whisper. Do you plan to erase me completely? I pulled out a set of documents I had prepared. I've designated you as chairman emeritus. No decision-making power, no interference in operations. But you'll be invited to anniversaries, shareholder meetings, and your name will remain in the company's history. An honorary seat? He repeated, his eyes narrowing, tinged with bitterness. Yes, I replied, holding his gaze. A position of tribute, not of rule. He stayed silent for a long while. The ticking of the wall clock echoed between us. At last, he let out a sigh, not of anger, but of fatigue. I once thought, if you kept fighting me, you'd end up with nothing, he said, eyes fixed on the window. I never imagined that very resistance would make you someone no one in this family could control anymore. I tilted my head, my voice dropping lower. I never fought you until you forced me to choose between my dream and my place here. When a child is pushed out, she has to learn to stand on her own. But if you had never pushed me away, Horizon might never have existed. He lifted his head, his eyes glancing at me, no judgment this time, but something closer to regret. Perhaps pride, though maybe too late to name it. I once thought you lived in the clouds. Looking back now, maybe I was the blind one. I rose, gathering the documents. At the door, I paused, not waiting for him to call me back, but to leave something clear behind. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm rebuilding what you dismissed. He said nothing. But I heard the scrape of his chair as he sat down, like an old man finally ready to hear the voice of a generation he once called noise, never realizing it was the sound of the future approaching. 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner ended in stunned silence and shattered illusions, Moretech carried a new name, More Horizon Technologies. The first signboard was raised at the Boston headquarters, the same place where I once was nothing more than a shadow unmentioned. Now, every time I walked through those doors, I was no longer the quiet third child, but the leader of a tech corporation rising sharply in a brutal market. The first quarter's revenue after restructuring surpassed every expectation. Horizon Dynamics integrated its own AI platform into the new management system, optimizing both operations and product development. Contracts my father once lost to outdated thinking were reclaimed with a data-driven yet human-centered approach. An investor once told me at a shareholders' easy meeting, I didn't think such a sudden transition could create a leap forward. But the way you've made More Horizon not only survive but thrive. That's why we trust you. Ethan was kept on, but stripped of authority. The board required him to return to school to complete fundamental management training. No exceptions, no shortcuts. I told him when I handed over the decision, if you want to stay with the family company, you have to learn how to build, not to hide burdens. Reluctantly, he began an evening MBA program at a business school in Cambridge. He was quieter now, often reading in the cafe downstairs at headquarters, sometimes sending me messages about finance concepts. It seemed he was finally willing to learn without shortcuts. Madison was different. After her luxury contracts collapsed and her reputation was damaged by the data breach scandal, she nearly disappeared from social media. But during the launch of a mental health app for teens, I was surprised to see her there, not in designer dresses or heavy makeup, but in simple clothes, her eyes clear. I was wrong, she said on camera, unscripted, unperformed. I used to think I needed admiration, the spotlight, but now I've learned to listen to myself. And I want to use my influence to help young people understand you don't have to sell yourself to be recognized. I gave her a chance, not out of sentiment, but because I believed those who truly want to change don't run from their past. Madison is now the communications ambassador for that project, traveling across schools in the Northeast to talk with teens about self-respect, boundaries, and digital identity. And my mother, Caroline, stopped drinking. A month after everything unraveled, she checked herself into rehab in Vermont. I hesitated when I picked up her call, her voice shaking. I need to live differently, not to atone, but to save myself. Now, she helps lead a support group for women founders in tech, listening, learning, and sharing lessons on navigating pressure from society, marriage, and outdated roles for women. She comes to the office 2 days a week, not as the CEO's wife, but as someone reclaiming herself after half a lifetime of silence. As for my father, Richard Moore, through all his glory years, he had never admitted he was wrong. But the day I represented More Horizon at the Boston Tech Conference, standing before hundreds of founders, investors, and reporters, I caught sight of him in the audience. Not in front, not with a badge, just quietly seated among the rows. That evening, he sent me a short message. "You did what I never thought anyone in this family could. You're not just better than me. You've learned how not to lose yourself in power." I kept that message in my private folder. I didn't reply. Nothing more needed to be said. This Thanksgiving, our table no longer had foie gras or rows of imported wine. We ate a simple dinner: roast turkey, pumpkin bread, a salad my mother made herself. Ethan brewed tea, Madison helped set the table, and my father sat quietly by the fire, watching as I sliced the apple pie. No live streams. No one snapping pictures with hashtags. No displays, no battles for attention, no hollow words of grandeur. Just a few people, once fractured by their own illusions, now learning to look at each other with different eyes, with respect and with hope. And I, once called the dreamer, sat among them without speaking, yet enough to slow the room, to soften it. Because sometimes what matters isn't who once won, but whether anyone has the courage to turn pain into the foundation for a new kind of family, a family that listens, makes room, and learns to repair. I'm not sure if what I've done has completely changed this family, or simply created enough silence for each person to reflect. But I believe one thing. Sometimes truth needs to be spoken, not to wound, but to heal the cracks silence left too long. No one is born to be diminished in their own home, but no one can demand respect without standing up to protect their own worth. What do you think of my journey? Of a daughter once dismissed who chose to answer with action instead of resentment. I'd like to hear your thoughts about family, forgiveness, and finding your place without hurting others. If you've been through something similar, share it. Perhaps your story will help someone out there find the courage to change their life. And if stories of family, growth, and inner strength resonate with you, follow this channel, because journeys like mine are just a small part of the many pieces of life we'll explore together.